I've been doing this whole minimalism thing and pursuing a more simple lifestyle for about 5 years now. And in that time, a lot has changed. So we need to talk. Well, hey friends, and welcome back. Today, I want to chat with you a bit about how 5 years in, minimalism has changed for me. It's one of those handful of things that I can look at and say that it has honestly changed my life in so many ways. But now, quite a few years in, there are several things that I've become a bit disillusioned with and things that I see differently now. And so I wanted to just sit down and have kind of an honest conversation about where I'm at now and how minimalism has changed for me. And I think that to really understand where I'm at now, we need to go back to the beginning. My whole journey with minimalism began when Christopher and I first got married. We combined our two lives and possessions into this tiny one-bedroom apartment that honestly did not have space for all of our stuff. And in the first few months of our marriage, I started experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety and kind of feelings of overwhelm whenever I would go into our home. And I knew that it wasn't our relationship that was the problem. We've been blessed with a really incredible marriage. But every time I walked through the doors of our home, I would get this kind of vaguely anxious feeling that I couldn't identify. And I couldn't quite identify the exact source of that stress until one day on YouTube, I stumbled across a video talking about minimalism and decluttering your life. And immediately when I saw that video, it was like a light bulb went off in my head, something clicked, and I realized that it was actually the stuff that we had around us that was literally bursting out of the seams of this small apartment that was causing all of the stress I was experiencing. And so immediately I began decluttering and simplifying my life, and over the course of about the next 6 months or so, I think I probably whittled my possessions down by about 70%. Which, especially since I was already in a small one-bedroom apartment to begin with, meant that I didn't own much. That was really such an exciting time for me. It felt like as I decluttered, it was like this very physical weight being lifted off of my shoulders, and I could walk through the doors of our apartment and not just feel overwhelmed anymore. And I mean, that really is so incredible. It was like this firsthand, tangible kind of lesson that I learned of how the most important things in life aren't things. Which I think is something that a lot of us know in our heads, but we actually have a hard time really grasping the feeling of that, like in our souls. But by decluttering and letting go of what we don't need and instead focusing on the relationships and experiences that fill our lives with joy, I think it really helps us to be able to understand that stuff is just stuff. It doesn't last. We can't take it with us. It helps us to understand that on a much deeper level. And so for a number of years, minimalism, in kind of the traditional way that we think of it, did serve me and it added value to my life. But over time, that began to change. I began noticing that some of the things that I was thinking or decisions that I was making just weren't quite sitting right with me. There was actually a very specific moment about 6 months ago when we were on our trip to Italy that I realized, okay, I really need to take a step back and to reevaluate some things here. We were in Florence, which is probably my favorite city I've ever visited. We went in one of the little shops and I came across a jacket that I really liked. I put it on, it fit perfectly, it looked amazing, the price was right, there was nothing not to love about this jacket, and I did love it. But then some serious overthinking set in and I began double, triple, and quadruple guessing whether or not I should buy this jacket. Do I really need more than one coat? What would other people think if I bought it? And would that feel minimalist enough to them if I owned 2 coats? And all that because I had some arbitrary idea in my head that I could only own a super specific and realistically random number of things. And all of this sounds a bit crazy to me now as it's going through my mouth, but they're all real thoughts that I had. And so the kind of sad part of the story is I ended up letting my doubts and fears and what ifs get the best of me, and I walked out of the store without the jacket. And it wasn't until I was thinking back on it later that I realized that I kind of let the dark side of minimalism get to me in that moment. I let these feelings that I had to do minimalism perfectly, that I had to focus on true need and utility above all else, what other people would think of me, and even just general overthinking, I let those get in the way of me purchasing what I know would have been something that I used, loved, and would have just genuinely enjoyed having as a memory of my trip. And looking back now, it was really that moment that brought to light for me for the first time some of the more negative things I'd been feeling about minimalism without knowing how to identify. And so in the past few months, I've really been reevaluating what I want minimalism to look like in my life going forward. Because like I was saying before, minimalism is something that has changed my life. And so I think that to a certain extent, that idea of simple living is always going to be a part of me. But I think that maybe a pitfall that I fell into, and that I think is really easy to fall into in the minimalist space if we're not careful, is that in focusing so much on not focusing on possessions, we actually hyper-focus on owning as little as possible. So instead of focusing on always owning more things, we're focusing on always owning less things. But the focus, either way, is still on things. And I think a good example of this is last year when Christopher and I moved into our house, we were trying to decide how big of a table that we needed, how many people it should seat, how many plates and dishes and bowls and things like that we needed. We love entertaining, we do it several times a week, and I remember that we decided to get a table for 8 and serving for that many people as well. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, a table for 8 in a house of 2, that feels a bit excessive, a bit not minimal, doesn't it? And what I realized was in that moment, I was actually focusing more on the number of things and having as little as possible than the experiences we'd be able to create by owning those items. There are some things that actually enable and enhance great relationships and unique experiences, whether that's my set of downhill skis or a table that seats 8. And so to get to where I'm at today, I've really had to go back to, for me, what is the heart of minimalism, which is about removing the excess so that we can focus better on the things that fill our lives with joy. And so where I'm at now and what I want minimalism to look like for me going forward is a bit different than that traditional minimalist ideal. I'm going to call it practical minimalism. It's basically minimalism for the everyday person, where I'm able to use the principles of minimalism as a tool to the extent that they serve me, but not more than that. I still want to value experiences over things, to buy less but better, but I also don't want to feel like it's this stringent set of rules that I have to stick to perfectly. And if I come across a vintage etching of Florence, Italy that I think would look really cool hung over my bed, I'm going to buy it and not think too much about it, which I actually did the other day. You should see it up here soon. And so now and down the road, you might not look at my home and immediately think to yourself, how minimal. You might think how clean or how tidy, and I do still want to keep things simple. But I think the key for me going forward, as simple as it sounds, is to do what makes me happy and not try to feel like I have to perfectly adhere to a specific arbitrary aesthetic, which isn't really even true to me. Don't get me wrong, the super cluttery aesthetic still isn't my vibe, but I think that there's a balance that I prefer rather than the stark white walls. And so really, at the end of the day, I'm just putting minimalism back in its place. I want to use it as a tool and not hold it up as some shiny goal that just takes all of this effort to maintain and to achieve. And so that's really it. Minimalism is, yes, here in my life to stay, but it is going to look a bit different going forward. Now, I'd love to know though, has minimalism and the way that you look at it changed over time? And if it has, tell me a bit about it. What does it look like for you now? And as always, don't forget to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already for more simple and intentional living videos coming at you twice a week. That's everything for today though, friends, so I hope you have an incredible day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.